my mindset after college kind of turned into, I need to start playing into my strengths. And when you are diagnosed with ADHD, you're constantly told all the negative things about yourself and all the ways you're going to struggle and all the ways you're not going to fit in with regular people. So I kind of just decided, okay, well, I do have kind of like a toolbox full of strengths that I think, people without ADHD might not even have or be able to understand. And if I can take those things and lean into them more, I can actually use them to my advantage, which is how I found my current job.
Hey everybody, welcome to Finding the Upside. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm in the studio today. I have Jane Carino.
Hello,
Jane. And Annika Ahlstrom.
Hi.
She's veteran here. She's been on a couple of times. But tonight, we are diving into the journey. Jane Carino, she is going to share her journey of being a recent college grad and her challenges through school with ADHD, and then transforming or transitioning into the work world and just sharing her journey. We have had a lot of discussion on this podcast. Annika's been a guest several times, bringing light and awareness to ADHD and just what needs to happen to be able to have a more accepting environment in all places, schools, workplaces, and so on. And so Jane was really interested to share her story, and we think it would be really helpful. She thinks it would be really helpful for others to hear how she has been able to navigate and find freedom outside of school and transitioning into a career. So I'm just going to give a brief intro and then turn it over to her. So as I said, Jane has recently graduated college and is now working in her first job and on her way to a successful career. This was far from what she expected. Jane had spent many years in school not really seeing the possibility of getting to where she is now, and I won't steal your story, but she's going to share her journey through high school and college and how she struggled with some of the many common things that people with ADHD do. Annika, as well, has had a lot of experience working side by side with people with ADHD, but from Jane's position, telling it from her story and from her perspective, we are really excited for her to be able to share it because there's a lot of people her age who could really benefit from these messages. So Jane, can you take just a couple of minutes and kind of share what your journey has been like, how you got to where you are now, and just briefly about what school was like for you and what you felt like and how that kind of went for you?
Sure. Thank you for the introduction, Maria. I appreciate that. So I recently graduated college in 2023. I had taken a gap year after graduating high school. I was struggling a little bit after high school with that transition. Transitions are always hard for people with ADHD, small or large. I think it was October of this year, I started my new job. I've had, customer service jobs and retail jobs in the past, but this is my first corporate position. I also play rugby. I'm on a semi-professional rugby team, and hopefully in the next couple of years, fully professional.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, very exciting.
So that's kind of what I've been up to, but as you were talking about through high school and college, my whole life I've struggled with having ADHD, and so I've just kind of had to put in a little bit extra work to help myself get through the transitions. And the reason why I wanted to come on today is because I felt like I had a unique story to tell and a success story. And I really like spreading positive messages about ADHD because I feel like there's a lot of negative things that we constantly hear all the time about it and how hard it is and how much of a struggle it is. So yeah, I was really interested in telling my story, and I love podcasts. I think they're a great form of like communication. So I thought it was a cool opportunity.
Yeah, well, I'm really glad, and I'm so thankful that you were willing to share your story and your journey and your perspective, because I think as we spoke before we recorded, it could be helpful to so many people to hear it from your voice. And I agree, and Annika as well. Like, we're trying to put the messages of positivity out there about ADHD, and not that there's something wrong with, because I think we'll get into that. I think that's a lot of times what people face through especially in school and sometimes in work. But the bright spot is that's changing now, because there's so much awareness, and we definitely want the positive focus to be out there about how to support everyone, accept everyone, and really the brilliance of what somebody with ADHD brings and can offer. It's just that it's not in what the school system kind of measures, right? It's like it doesn't fit. What do you call it, Annika? The lollipop heads, right?
Yeah, the lollipop.
So it's like if you envision the school has like a doorway with, it perfectly fits people who are lollipop heads. So they go right through with a smooth transition. But not all of us are lollipop heads. We'll come in all different shapes and sizes, and our brains are all different, and doesn't mean there's something wrong. It's just, it's not a fit. So how do we embrace that? So I'm really happy that you're willing to share. If you could start out telling me, what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced in school with ADHD, and why do you think that still exists today for so many students, from your perspective?
So I would say, well, for me personally, there's a lot of different symptoms and things that kind of come with having ADHD. And to my luck, I have all of them. One of the funny things I feel like about ADHD that I've heard people talk about is, this is so silly, but I've heard people say there's the girl ADHD and the boy ADHD. So girls with ADHD tend to be illustrated as just kind of having their head in the clouds, staring out the window, maybe a little bit chatty, while boys with ADHD tend to be illustrated as hyperactive and troublemakers and that kind of thing. And I actually have kind of all of those things. So throughout school, I really never fit into the mold. Teachers never really knew what to do with me. I had struggle with academics. I had issues, behavior, and overall focus was something that I really struggled with, whether that was in the classroom or at home. And mainly what I think really bothered me was the isolation. And I think a lot of people with ADHD who have been through the school system in America can at least relate to this, but it is very isolating, because whether you're being pulled out of class for something, or I used to have teachers who would, when I was not paying attention or getting too chatty, they would just send me out in the hallway to just stand there. And it was embarrassing, and it's also in a place where we're supposed to be encouraged to learn and socialize. It was just a very isolating experience. And I was pegged as lazy or troublemaker or I didn't care, and I didn't feel like I was any of those things. So it kind of, I was constantly struggling with, people telling me I was one way, but I didn't really feel like that's who I really was on the inside.
It's very, first of all, I want to respond to a couple of things, and I want to ask Annika a follow-up question about that. It's interesting. I had never thought of what you had just said about characterizing girly ADHD and boy ADHD, and how that in itself is an issue because, again, we're like now taking something and then making it, okay, it's this or that. It's not all the time, right? And I can see how that would be even more troubling in a classroom environment, because as a student feeling that way and them not knowing what to do with you, like even what they did do for girls or boys wasn't always appropriate and probably still isn't. But why is it characterized like that? Because all of us are just different, But Annika, I would love for you to share, what Jane describes. How common is that? And the people that you work with, or when you worked in, because Annika, those of you who have met Annika before, or listened, or don't know, Annika worked in a school for support for all types of learning challenges and diagnoses, and ADHD being one of them. Well, what is that common, what she described? And what is your take on why that's not changing in education?
So first of all, I have to say, my heart breaks for you.
Me too, Jane.
And my heart breaks for every young person,
Yes.
Or older person, quite frankly, who has gone through what you describe. And it's exactly, it takes me back to so many students who I witnessed went through similar situations that you describe. And it's heartbreaking, and it's shaming. And it's, like you said, it devalues you. Your self-esteem just takes a hit after hit. I've read somewhere that, by the time a child who has ADHD is 10 years old, they've heard 10,000 negative comments, specifically about their executive functioning in school. And, that's it's tough enough to be a kid, and now you've got that, right? So I think it's very common when you describe, but, every situation, every person is so unique. So, every time I meet a person who, has gone through a similar situation, I just listen, because I feel like the first thing I want them to know is that I don't know their story. Just because I know some, situations and have witnessed many people go through this, I don't know their specific situation. And until I really listen and hear them, I don't know their journey. And so a big part of connecting for me is listening at first. Why is it still this way? Because I don't think there's enough education for teachers and educators
100%.
out there. They really don't understand. And I think that some schools are so large and there's turnover, and it's heartbreaking because I feel like there needs to be more education, there needs to be more resources, and just more understanding of what ADHD is. And, even listening to you say girls and boys, it's, different. Like, no, it's different for every individual.
We're all
and we
individuals.
need to respect every individual and listen to every person's story so that we can help them and so that we can find that connection, because learning is difficult in the environments that we have. So
thank you for that. Well, that's the other thing too, is that I think part of, changing this and putting positive messages out is the education. And that's part of what we're all trying to do here, is really put some understanding and give some perspective that is different, because the more people can hear your story or somebody else's story and what the struggles are and what would work better, perhaps, from your perspective, the more that there can be some more understanding about how to change all that. We won't get into, there's lots of bureaucracy in the school system and so on, but really, I think this goes in our society as well, right? Because what happens in a container then spreads to society as well, and if society doesn't understand it, then it's out there even when you're out of school. It's in the workplace, it's in, and that's varying degrees. So I think that's what our intention is here. So I would like to pivot, and maybe we'll go back to this later. Can you talk about, because I know a big part of what we chatted about was your feeling like when you were in school and all the struggles and challenges that you faced, and you persevered, by the way. So because anybody would give up, right? Given that. So that's a big part of this is to know that you get to the other side of something and it may change, and that is your story. But what was the specific things that you thought about your future? And could you take us through that journey when you were about to graduate college and you were looking for a job or thinking about what am I going to do when I get done with school? Talk to me about how you characterized that and some of the fears you had, and then how you kind of were able to discover something different.
Well, it's kind of an interesting question. I feel like I've heard other neurodivergent people say this, where sometimes when you are growing up as a neurodivergent person with whatever you are struggling with, sometimes it can be really hard to visualize a future at all.
Yeah.
So I kind of never really knew what was going to happen. Through high school, I never knew what college I wanted to go to because it just didn't seem like it didn't seem within reach to me. And then in college, I couldn't really picture where I would be after college because it was just kind of, it never felt like something that was for me. Like my whole life, things kind of felt like they were built for other people. And so whether that was college or a career, I had those similar feelings there. But I have a lot of perseverance, and I'm kind of hard-headed, and I think growing up with these struggles kind of instills that feeling in you because you have a little bit of a chip on your shoulder and you want to prove people wrong. So as we were talking about the other night, my mindset after college kind of turned into, I need to start playing into my strengths. And when you are diagnosed with ADHD, you're constantly told all the negative things about yourself and all the ways you're going to struggle and all the ways you're not going to fit in with regular people. So I kind of just decided, okay, well, I do have kind of like a toolbox full of strengths that I think, people without ADHD might not even have or be able to understand. And if I can take those things and lean into them more, I can actually use them to my advantage, which is how I found my current job. I kind of took the skills that I knew that I had, and I said, I don't, at this point, like, coming out of college, it's hard to really, you're not going to get your dream job most of the time.
Yeah, it's a journey.
It's 100% a journey. So I said, okay, let me start with something that I know that I can be good at. And that's kind of how I got where I am.
So I'm curious, I think that's amazing that you were able to kind of self-reflect and tell me about that. Did you just on your own kind of take stock of, okay, hey, what are my strengths, what am I good at, and then started your job search to find something that would match that? What was that like, and how did you come to that?
Well, I'm sure anyone who's currently applying to jobs, like full-time jobs, knows how difficult that is right now. And for the first month or so, it was just such a struggle. I think that we're not really told or don't really expect how challenging the job search is right now. And a lot of people have a lot of unreal expectations about what their life is going to be post-graduation. So I tried to do some expectation settings for myself and say, like, this might not be something that I'm necessarily interested in, but I know me, I can kind of be interested in anything. And I've kind of had to like learn that over the years. It makes things more fun for me when I'm learning. So I had, as I was saying earlier, I've had retail jobs, customer service jobs. I know that I like helping people. I know that I love talking to people and meeting new people. and that I'm a problem solver, and that I like to help people. And so that's kind of how I started to realize maybe sales would actually be something that I could be good at, which is crazy because my whole life, if I ever thought about sales, I'd be like, I can't do that. That sounds like so stressful, and like the rejection. But the funny thing is about like the rejection aspect of it is, you know, rejection, going back to the ADHD thing, is something that I've had to deal with my whole life. And at this point, it's nothing to me. Like
you've built that muscle of resilience.
100% built that muscle of resilience, and I think that it kind of seemed like the perfect fit almost. I talked about it a lot with my mom, and we also kind of figured that it's super transferable. So that's kind of why I wanted to share this specifically with people who might be struggling to decide what they want to do, because sometimes it might be something you really wouldn't expect. Sometimes it's kind of hiding in plain sight.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, like the fact that you had the insight and the intuition, you followed that intuition to think about what you're good at, and you know, you mentioned that, right? Like talk to people, you like to help people. Those are like some really core strengths that actually are extremely attractive, you know, for many jobs, right? So those are core natural abilities that can help you thrive. And then to think about, okay, where could that fit in a job? I mean, I think you're absolutely right. But I also would say, I want to respond to this. I think you're right that many people coming out of school think you're going to get the first job and it's going to be, you know, your dream job and you start your career. It's never like that. I mean, I know it's extremely challenging now, and there's lots of reasons for that. Just even the job search, the way they do job search, there's not a lot of face-to-face. You have to face a lot of rejection of just submitting, you know, your application or applying or sending whatever through some filter, and sometimes you never even get to speak to a human. They're like, thank you for your consideration, but it was always like that. Right? And I remember even my own journey coming out of school where it's like, this isn't what I'm going to do for my life. And my dad was kind of like, what? That's the job you're getting? And it was the same thing where it's like, okay, I'm going to learn here. I'm going to then use this as a stepping stone. And I think what you were really wise about was really to play to the strengths. And I really want to focus in on that and talk more about that, because that's also not just you know, that's your perspective, but it's also a research-backed, science-backed perspective that people with ADHD have superpowers that other people do not, right? It's like the flip side of all the things that you've heard that you're not good at. There's other things that you thrive in that others can't do. And so, Annika, could you like give a little perspective on that? And for others, like Jane, you had the natural instinct of what to do, of how to identify that. But are there other things and ways that people can identify those things? Are there assessment tools? Are there, like, what's kind of like, first of all, I really want to focus on how do people assess their own strengths and superpowers? How do they draw that out? She had the instinct to do it and did it. But what is the best advice?
Well, first of all, I want to say I'm so impressed with your story.
Yeah.
And I think it's wonderful that you're doing this, because you're doing such a great service to anyone who's listening to this and your journey, and you're clearly very resilient. And you mentioned that you play rugby, and that many of the young people that I work with play a sport. And so when I start working with them, I focus on the things that they're good at. And I try to speak the sport that they, you know, or the thing that they're passionate about. We do a couple of self-assessments early on. And one of them is really, you know, looking at their strengths and their challenges, both. And I really pump up the strengths, because they have not heard those, you know, mirrored back to them enough. Because they need to hear it, because those are real huge strengths, just like Maria was saying. And the fact that you could really pick those out for yourself and pinpoint them. And I also heard you mention your mom. So I also feel like when you have a real supporter in your life who is there for you, that you can talk with and reason things out when things are tough, that's what a gift, right? Mm-hmm. So, I work with the young people that I work with will always join with their family, with their parents. And, oftentimes the parents will, through our work together, we'll see, me mirroring back the strengths. And then you just see almost like something happen to the parents' faces because they've been so scared for their child. And so they've been focusing on the challenges instead of the strengths too. So little by little, they start saying, yeah, that's right. My child is really good at this, and it's so beautiful to watch.
Switch
because
the focus.
It's almost like they've heard from teachers, they've heard from people over and over again about these things that these young people can't do instead of, but they're really great at this. Let's embrace that because they need to fill this cup, And so little by little, that momentum builds. It takes a little bit of time because, you want it to be authentic and genuine and coming from a place of connection. But, it's really important to turn that around, that negative thinking, because you can't blame them. They've kind of shut down most people because after a while you get tired of that, right? Yeah. But then when you little by little you start to really, get them out and get their fire burning. I mean, there's nothing they can't do. And that's what's so beautiful to watch is when they start getting a system, as I call it, together, moving towards success, then they can try stuff out and they can learn. But they're some of the most resilient people I've ever met and most intelligent. Yeah. And so these gifts are phenomenal. Yeah. Should not be hidden.
It's really amazing when you see that shift. And again, it's great that you had the ability to do that, and I would encourage everybody to do that self-reflection, right? Just like you did. It's like, what am I good at? What do I like to do? And play to your strengths and lean in. I heard you say that, and I think that's so important. And there are things out there that people can do. I think also, the connection of how I know Annika is my son also has ADHD, and the center that we brought him to, They were very big on that. That was how I met Annika, was we were referred to Annika. But that's how they presented in his language in 6th grade, in language that he would understand. Here's all the things you're strong at. These are the areas that, might present some challenges. So, and one of the things that they said, and I remember, they said it's very important for everyone around person with ADHD to speak in that language. These are your strengths. These are some areas where you might need extra support. So as you transition to an adult, being able to do that for yourself and remind yourself of that is so critical. And having people around you that can point that out, but also there's plenty of things, even if you don't go to a place to get diagnosed, there's things that assessments you can take, and we just had another guest on here that has a platform of assessments that one of the assessments is Strengths Finders. Through a series of questions, it kind of identifies the strengths, and you're like, wow, I am good at that. So things like that I think are super important. And again, I'm going to clarify that you doing that on your own is a big deal. And I think anybody who's listening who's your age, to have the ability to do that or get support of others to be able to do that, whether your mom helped you or just look within, is super important. Because once you start to focus on that, it sounds like that's what helped you see further possibility and take steps forward.
Yeah. Didn't do it on my own, though. I have to shout out both of my parents. Okay. Super supportive. And honestly, I don't think I would have gotten as far as I am without them as well.
That's beautiful for you.
They always say they always say, oh, no, you could do it without us. But,
Well, everybody needs a team, a support team, right? And a pep squad, if you will, right? So I think that's beautiful that you did acknowledge that. Let me ask you this: how talk about your sales role and your job, because when we first were talking about you saying that you really wanted to talk about how sales was such a good fit for you and the whys of what your day looks like. Like, talk to me a little bit about that. You mentioned a bit, and hopefully you're going to go there, about that it's almost like you didn't have the confines of school, right, where stuff was dictated to you. Talk to me about that and what freedom that brought for you and how that helped you.
Yeah, so I was actually super fortunate in that it kind of all the pieces fell in together with the sales role, because as I was saying earlier, originally it was, okay, play to my strengths. This kind of checks all the boxes of like what I'm good at and what kind of brings me gratification. But additionally, a sales job for me, and I think other people with ADHD might even find some helpfulness in this too, is you have a lot of autonomy in your schedule and what you do and how you do it. You don't necessarily have assignments in the same way that you would have in another job. At least this is how my role is. I'm specifically doing sales development. I might be given certain lists or certain territories in the country to have to work in, but my day and my schedule is completely up to me.
You set that.
Which is very, very important to me, because I don't necessarily have the work capacity as other people, and the fact that I can step away from a second or take a walk or go to the gym or have a drink or talk to my coworkers, that really helps me get through the day. And on top of that, the nature of my specific role, I'm doing a lot of my own research and kind of finding my own solutions to problems. And it makes me feel very independent. It gives me a sense of autonomy. I don't feel bogged down with a manager or a supervisor kind of dictating, okay, here's this assignment and it's due at this time.
Just like school.
Of course. And that, exactly, it's very far from school. It makes me feel, good when I do accomplish things, because it feels like I really did it myself. And then on top of that, I also do work in a team environment. So even though we are working independently, we help each other all the time. We sit near each other. We ask each other for advice. We give each other tips. And then
so it's got that community.
It has such a community vibe to it that I absolutely love. And I really, truly never would have thought how much I would enjoy it, to be honest. And I feel like I'm learning very valuable things about just kind of the business world in general, and kind of like how life works through my job. And I'm pretty confident that I'm going to be able to take what I've learned and kind of go in any direction with it. Yeah,
that's great. I mean, there's so much goodness in what you share, just about, having the autonomy and having that freedom. And I would say that, and Annika can concur, but like, that's a big part of it, because it's like, you have to do it this way when you're in school, or if there is a job that makes you do it this way. I know I struggled, and I'm not diagnosed, but who knows, maybe I have it, I don't know. But I would find myself feeling very confined and trapped almost, and not thriving. Whereas if I could do it my own way, or have my own schedule, or like you said, a big thing, being able to step away, go take a walk, go to the gym. I mean, these are things that in corporations now, there's more talk about, accommodating kind of that integration of, I don't want to say work-life balance, but integration of life, but for support of what every person needs to be at their best, right? I'm one person, I am not good first thing in the morning. The 5 a.m. club is not something that I ever strive to be a member of. I'm not. I'm better in the late morning. That's when I like hit my stride, right? So all people, whatever their, preferences and whatever way they work the best, that should be supported. Whether you have ADHD or not in a corporation, it should be. But I think it's so interesting how you were able to find that, what worked for you, and how that was so different than what you were being faced with in school. And I think, from your perspective, why would you think it would be like any different than school? Because you never had that experience. And I think that's another thing that's really important to point out for people, is that you saying that it's not going to be like school. It's going to be very different.
Exactly.
Right? You talked, and I want to ask Annika a follow-up question, but you talked about, when we spoke about like getting an assignment for school, right? And you'd procrastinate and you'd, wouldn't do it or whatever. And talk to me about, is that because of that confine and too much structure that didn't fit you? Like, in other words, or was it just the whole thing was so confining? And where I'm going is, if you had something that had to get done at your job today, like one task or one thing, how do you think you would handle that now, given that you have so much autonomy and freedom in most areas of your role?
Well, I think, growing up, it's a challenge of demand avoidance, I think they call it. Mm-hmm. And that's always been something that I struggled with. I've always had kind of like issues with authority. I did not like being told what to do, and I definitely did not like to be told how to do something. Mm-hmm. And that's, I feel like, what's so great about my job now is that when I do have a task, generally it's a task that I've laid out for myself. And of course, like with the nature of sales, we'll get lists of specific people we have to call, or specific regions. Mm-hmm. But in between that, I'm making all of my own decisions. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot easier for me to complete a task that feels like I initiated it.
Got it.
Than someone, handing me an assignment and say, this is due at 3 today.
I understand. Yeah, I think that's really important to consider. And Annika, like, just from your perspective and just what like, I know you work with adults as well, right? And we've had a lot of conversations about this in other episodes, but, how do we support that in the workplace to be able to allow the freedom, flexibility? I mean, these are big things that all corporations are looking at right now, right? And not just for people with ADHD, just to support everyone to be at their best. But what do you think is the best thing that you would advise anybody that's an adult that's struggling in a work environment because they don't have the autonomy or the flexibility? What are some of the things that you might talk to them about?
Well, I think, you said it really, really well. I mean, you can't expect that the first job that you're going to, get is going to be a perfect fit, right?
Never
So you
is.
have to feel it out.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of that first, initial response of, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be able to do this. How am I going to be able to do this? And getting anxiety and stopping yourself in your tracks, instead saying, is this something I want? I always, tell the young people who are interviewing, you're interviewing the company or the employer just as much as they're interviewing you. Go in there with that confidence of, you have so many gifts to give, and go in there and ask those questions so that you can get a sense of, what is this work culture like?
Right. What's the culture about?
Go in there prepared, talk it through with myself or with someone you trust, and come up with really smart questions, because certain things about yourself. You're not going to know everything. Some things you're going to discover, and guess what? You may take a job that's not a perfect fit.
Yeah.
You found that.
Yeah.
I've been in jobs that
same.
that haven't been a perfect fit. And you start to see, what works for you. I love that you are in a place that understands your gifts and gives you the space to make the choices you need to make so that you can shine.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what everybody wants.
Yeah.
But again, it's educating also the place of, employment, educating your bosses and making sure everybody understands that we all need different things.
Yeah.
It doesn't take away the accountability.
No.
You have you have to be accountable for doing your job, but if you want everybody to do well and work towards a common goal, then you're going to have to maybe give them different things.
Yeah.
Right? Because they need different ways to do their job.
Yeah, I think that you are definitely at an advantage now because you identified your strengths and now you found a place and you see what works, right? You talked about all that. The community aspect, you're going to want to have that anywhere you go, right? Mm-hmm. The autonomy and the freedom and, just the ability to work the way you work best, the fact-finding, kind of, I call it, because we work that way in my company. It's very loose. It's like, hey, check this out, research this, come back to me, tell me what you think. There's no timeline. There's no like, okay, do it this way, do A, B, C. It's just loose. And some people don't thrive like that. I will say that. Some people don't. But more often than not, the people who are creative, innovative, need that kind of environment rather than a do A, B, C, and don't divert from this, because that's a fit for some people, but usually not the people who are the most creative, most innovative. And that's definitely not me. But I think that you are definitely finding what works for you in this job and what you're going to want to have at the other cultures of any other corporation that you go to. And I think for anybody listening, that is what's really important, is, as you said, really understanding what kind of environment do I thrive in, and then you want to look for that, as best you can. And like you said, you've been happy where you are. Sometimes it's not a match, right? It's happened to me. It's happened to probably lots of people, but that's important to kind of know that going in, and I think that's beautiful. And I think also the other thing I really want to underscore here is the good news is a lot of companies are trying to structure work environments like that now. They're recognizing that not everybody works in the same way. Of course, I have a big problem with leaders that it's my way or the highway. That's never been the kind of leader I am. And I'm on a mission to teach more leaders to do it the rebel way, which works way better, because the result is that you give people more freedom and autonomy, they actually do better and then can play to their strengths and can set their day up and work the way they want to and so on and so forth. So I think that's so critical, not just because of your ADHD journey. That's just people in general, that we are all different, and being able to have that, I think, is really key. What do you think is the biggest thing about this transition from school to working in terms of what it did for your confidence? I know that we talked about, and a lot of people, I know plenty of people who struggle with this. ADHD is very isolating, and you hear lots of negative things, and that can impact your confidence, and you can have a tremendous amount of self-doubt. What did this transition, talk to me about that and how that helped you, and other things that helped you along the way kind of combat, the negative environment or feedback you got, and how did you help build that resilience and push out the self-doubt?
So I definitely had self-esteem issues all growing up. I think I was able to, at least as a kid, kind of give the air of someone who is really confident. Mm-hmm. But even though on the inside I was really struggling with my self-esteem constantly, mm-hmm. Because of the things that I had mentioned earlier, just kind of hearing negative things about me all the time, not being successful in things that everyone else is successful in. Mm-hmm. But after college, I actually had a very great college experience in general. I think I kind of was slowly building the whole time, mm-hmm. and taking different classes, meeting new people, having different experiences, I was able to slowly, one little bit of confidence can kind of snowball into like your overall how you view yourself. But when I was applying to jobs, I think the thing that really helped me was having like a really subtle mindset shift of like, okay, so I've been in school and I've always felt like school is something that takes from me, but my job should be really something that I can get things out of instead. So with that little mindset shift, I felt like I had more excitement and interest in trying new things, whether they would be challenging or not, because I felt like it was more for me. And, growing up with ADHD, I feel like we're constantly kind of masking ourselves and trying to fit into a mold. But I think the job search in general and finding my job was something that kind of gave me the confidence to go out in the world and be like, okay, this is who I am. Take it or leave it, but I think I'm really great, and I have a lot of new and unique things that I'm bringing to the table.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you.
That's great. And the fact that you were able to kind of shift that. It's interesting you're saying that, because I'm only going from my own experience as well. I've heard similar responses even from my own son, right, about school. He's still in school, and talking about the future with a job, and he kind of had the same thing, like, I feel like a job, it's going to be different because I'm going to get things out of that. It's going to be different than school. And I was like, yeah, okay, that's true, but, like, you got to get through school first. Right? And I'm sure you heard that, too.
Yeah, or, like, like, with school, in high school, you have to go to high school. With college, you're kind of paying for the experience. But with a job, like, you're being paid for it. And I think that goes a long way too. Sometimes true. That's not even like something you need to do, but it's like you kind of have a whole new perspective on task when I'm like, okay, I'm being paid for every single thing I'm doing.
Exactly what Christian said.
Yeah.
And I had never really thought about it that way, so that makes a lot of sense. I think also that's a big factor, right? Being excited about it. You approach it with more excitement, because when it's like gloom and doom, like, oh, I'm paying for this and I still got to do all this work in school, very different than, okay, now I'm being paid. And it's a little different, the what I have to put forth, the effort I have to put forth. It feels like an exchange, that you're getting something out of it. And I think school can sometimes, even for the best of kids, not feel like that. So I had never thought about that. But if I now reflect on my own journey through school, I kind of felt the same way, It's just interesting. Annika, tell me about, in terms of confidence, what are the things, and self-esteem, what are the things that, is the journey similar to what Jane describes in terms of gaining that self-confidence and being able to combat the self-esteem issues? What are the things that you see, and is there anything different, that you see others that have done that to help that?
Yeah, I think I really like the way you said that, because I think there's a lot to that whole being paid, because now it's like I have worth, right, in a different way, right? And it's a combination of a lot of things. But I think, back to what we were saying, what you were sharing, Maria, with that visual of the school and the lollipop head, a big part of what I do with young people, most of them, when we're using that diagram, is like middle or high school and some college. But, what I say is K through 12 schooling is that's not going to be your life. We got to get you through this place with your self-esteem intact, so that you can go out and play to your strengths. Because
that's a good way to look at it.
Because here, it has to be done this way. I still think there's a lot of changes that can be made there for it to be a better experience than certainly what you shared and what I've witnessed. But we got to get you through this place with this amazing brain and your different way of seeing things, your creativity, all these wonderful things. We have to remain, keep them intact, But at the same time, we have to get you to do your best, because that will, when you get out, offer the most opportunities for you to let that incredible, mind, show what you can do.
Yeah.
So it's a combination. I don't want young people to think, oh, life is going to be K through 12. It's not. You're going to play to your strengths as you go, and you're going to figure it out. That being said, your brain is very much still developing, right? So with a diagnosis of ADHD, mid to late 20s, some people say early 30s. So you're going to be discovering all kinds of things about yourself in this job. And perhaps, you'll get to a point where you're like, you know what, I love all these things, but now I really want to try these things, right? So it's a journey. It's a just a discovery and a wonderful adventure to be on. But the fact that you're growing, especially in your self-awareness and seeing what's working for you, you're just going to grow stronger and better and shine even more. So it's a great
I think that's
story.
The biggest thing that, in thinking about, even when we talked before today, and I was just thinking about everything you said, and just obviously I've known you since you were younger, and just seeing you come out on that other side is so inspiring and so yes. And I think also important to highlight, because I think, and you've said it yourself, I think if people are looking at life the way you were, a year or two ago, or even 4 years ago, when you're still, trying to get through school, know that it's not going to, as you said, it's not going to be like that forever. It never is. And then it also, I feel so old when I say this, but it is a journey, right? It is a journey, and you're learning things along the way, and knowing that you're going to look back when you're 30 and go, school, that was like a little blip. You know what I mean? That was like a little blip. And it's hard to know that and really take that in when you're going through it. But just to see that you've done that, and when did you graduate?
I graduated in 2023.
Yeah, so like a year and a half ago, right? And you're on the other side of that. I think that's the biggest value of you coming here and sharing this. And so for anybody that is listening, I think that is something that is a big takeaway. And just you sharing how you've gotten to the other side of that is so important. I also think that there's so much more that could be gained from looking at all the unbelievably successful people who have dyslexia, ADHD. I mean, and there are tons. Have you ever looked?
Oh, yeah.
Right? That's a big thing for people. If you look at people who are very accomplished, whether they're artists, creatives, some are celebrities, some are CEOs of companies, inventors. It is unbelievable. I would say this isn't scientific, but 80% of them have some kind of diagnosis, whether it's ADHD, dyslexia, or sometimes both. ADHD, dyslexia,
I also have
dysgraphia.
dyslexia.
Yeah, okay. So, and again, it's really common. It's more common than you think. And to your comment at the beginning of this episode, to say that it's so isolating when you get that diagnosis, right? And part of that is that's a longer conversation. It's so pathological? Is that the right word?
Pathologizing?
Huh?
Pathologizing?
Because the diagnosis of what the word is, right? It kind of makes it so, it's like, why can't we label it like superpower attention deficit, or not even deficit, superpower attentiveness? Because, when you look at the people who have those diagnoses and what they've accomplished, you're like, wow. And I think that can have a big impact to understand that the people who are the most creative, most inventive, very successful, have powered through with those same diagnoses.
Totally.
And right? I mean, I'd love it to, you use the word neurodivergent, and that is really a better, kind of encompassing bucket. Because we're all neurodivergent. Guess what? We all are, because our brains are different. Our brains are unique and different. So I love that. I'm having a moment where I don't remember what else I wanted to ask. So this will be an edit for sure.
Well, even the diagnosis ADHD is the
let's talk
name
about that.
is just
Say that again to start so she can edit it clean.
okay. So even the diagnosis, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. There's not an attention deficit. First of all, I don't like the word deficit.
Yeah.
But also, it's actually an abundance of attention.
Yes.
It's how you're using that attention that becomes a challenge.
Yeah.
But it's not a deficit. So
Nope.
it's actually a misnomer. It's not accurate. So I'm not the only one, but there are many people who have a real hard time with the actual, term.
Yeah,
It's not accurate.
And that's where this came from. Also, Pasha Marlowe was somebody who I had on the podcast, and she talked about, and I'm killing the word, but whatever it was, that the labels and the diagnosis that come from, the DSM-V are so is it pathological?
Well, it's pathologizing.
Pathologizing, okay.
Right? I think that's what you're looking for. Or,
Thank you.
Yes?
Say it again.
Pathologizing?
Pathologizing. And that's part of the issue, right? And so when you said deficit, that a lot of people are talking about this now. And I think the more we talk about it, the more messages that are out there on social media. There's so many reels that I come across that people are saying, we have to stop calling it that because it's mislabeled. And Trevor Noah, I just showed this to Christian. Trevor Noah, who has ADHD, talked about exactly this, that it's an abundance of attention, right? And he kind of described how in a conversation things will go for him, where somebody will be talking, a group of people will be talking, and they talk about, some buildup because of hard water on the shower thing or something like that. And then all of a sudden his brain goes, do I have hard water or soft water? And does soft water cause more rust, or does that cause rust, or is it copper? And how do you get rid of that? And he's gone. So it's like his attention was on that one thing, and he was hyper focused on it. But to the rest of the group, he looks like he's not paying attention, disinterested, And somebody who knows him could go like that, and you go, oh. But to somebody who doesn't know him, they think, this person doesn't have any interest or is not paying attention.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
And when I showed that to Christian, he's like, that's exactly what happens
Yeah.
to me.
Where it's like a normal person's brain is not normal, but a non-ADHD
Yes.
person's brain is going from A to B to C to D, whereas our brains might go from A to Q to T to S.
Yeah.
And it's not like you can't focus. It's like you're focused on everything at one time almost.
Yeah, that's why
it's an abundance of focus.
It's an abundance of
the
focus.
The challenge becomes, how do you hone it? So it's not a correct term.
No.
Attention deficit is not accurate. It's not.
No.
They need to change it.
Yeah, agreed. We're on the mission to make that happen. There's so many people that want that to change. So,
I know.
All right. I definitely want to ask a question about sports, if you don't mind. But I also want to just know if there's anything that we didn't kind of touch on that you wanted to bring out that you can think of right now. I'm trying to look.
I think maybe things will come to me.
Okay, that's fine. That's totally fine. I just wanted to make sure. Okay. All right. So I'm going to ask about sports. So, Jane, you mentioned that you play rugby, on your way, hopefully, to maybe professional rugby, semi-professional right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, amazing. You've always been involved in sports, is that true?
Yeah, literally always.
Okay. Tell me about that, and how has that helped you? And what has that allowed for you has it complemented dealing with ADHD? Has it helped you persevere or build certain things that if you weren't involved in sports, you think you would be missing? What do you think?
Well, we could honestly probably have a whole nother episode about this.
Maybe we will.
It's definitely a huge range of things I could talk about, but I think more relating to this conversation, doing sports my whole life has really instilled in me a sense of discipline that I think is really, really challenging for most people to be able to develop without sports. I think that having a routine every day, week, hour of what you do, and kind of how you can be rewarded from following a routine. It kind of, I feel like, changes your brain chemistry almost, and it kind of builds your sense of accountability for how you live your life. So I think that I've been really fortunate to be able to transfer that kind of the skill of having discipline and enforcing discipline independently on myself to my job. So I've been able to learn kind of, if you do hard work in this area, it will pay off for A, B, and C. And I use that kind of thinking with, the work that I do in my job and just in regular life. I also think that, and I think I've heard you mention this about your son as well, but people with ADHD kind of have an infinite amount of energy, and sports is the perfect way to have an outlet for that energy. And the fact that, or one of the main reasons why I still continue to play after college is because I literally don't know what I would do without that outlet. And it also brings me a sense of accomplishment outside of work that I think I'm really lucky to have as well. Because if I have a day of work or a week of work where things aren't going well, and I might have not been as successful as I wanted to or performed the way I wanted to, I always have like that extra thing that I have outside. I don't have to focus on, I can kind of put away my thoughts about work or relationships or whatever and focus on the goal of what I'm trying to do on my team. And it kind of, it keeps me going in a way that I don't think I would necessarily be able to do without them.
Yeah. That's it's so interesting that you say that, and I love that. And I definitely, one of the things that my son went through is he played a sport and then stepped away and found that the structure that was there, and you could call it discipline, you could call it structure. I mean, I think it's the one and the same, right? The structure requires you to be disciplined, right? Because you got to do this, you got to do that, etc. And when that structure fell away, it was very difficult. He struggled quite a bit. So I think that's also some of the elements in sports that allow that. And I would agree with you that he now has said, I used to be able to know, okay, here's my day, and what you said about energy I think was important, right? Used to have a full day of school, which we've talked about what that felt like, and then have the outlet of 2.5 hours of football practice or rugby practice or games or whatever. It's important for ADHDers, right, to be able to have that outlet to burn that energy off, or also to have that kind of comparison, right? That comparison, that difference in terms of activity. I think that's really important. So what I would want to know from you is that if there's people that have sports that they played in school, and if they are no longer going to do that, how would they keep that? What would you recommend? How they would keep that discipline and what they gained from sports in their life? I mean, I know it might be simple, could be working out on their own, and but what would you say to people who are thinking that?
Well, number one, I think everyone with ADHD should be going to the gym. Well, that's not true. Should be working out in some way. Okay. I think
physical
that exercise, whether that's literally going on a walk, if that's what you're into, or lifting weights, or going on runs, or riding a bike, that's something that everyone with ADHD, that should be taken as if it's like a medicine. Like, I think that's so critical to my mental and physical health. But on the other hand, I think that if you don't have that, and sports are definitely not for everyone, I think that there's a ton of options of things that can kind of get you outside of yourself, into a community, into a routine. I did a ceramics class for a while in college, which I felt was almost kind of similar to doing like a sport, in the sense where you had like a schedule with like your pieces. You would have like, okay, so first I'm gonna do this, and then I'm gonna put it in the kiln. So, and then you're getting outside, you're active, you're around like a community.
Right. All the elements.
You're talking about things, you're strategizing about things. So I've always been like into art as well. So, you know, that's like just a quick example. But I think that there's a ton of things. I think it's honestly a matter of getting yourself out there and doing something.
Yeah.
Because I think with the issue of a lack of self-esteem or a lack of confidence or a lack of motivation, I think the hardest challenge sometimes is just saying, okay, I have to do something. It's going to make you feel worse if you're stagnant. Especially people with ADHD, they kind of have a reverse thing with their brain that tells them, just stop doing everything. Just don't get out of bed. It's not worth it. But you really have to like fight against that voice, I feel.
That's great advice.
Thank you.
That's great advice. And I would agree. I do want to ask, Annika, I want to ask you something, but I want to respond to in terms of working out or exercise, right? One of the things now that is being talked about more, and this is science-based, right? Science-backed. When you exercise, flood your brain with serotonin, right? So there is the calming and mental health and all the benefits you get from that. And you said it's like medicine. Agreed. And there are some treatment plans that do incorporate that's a big part of helping ADHD and people who have ADHD. But Annika, talk to me about, because a lot of what she said, you know, whether it's a sport or also even ceramics, just the structure and the process, right, of something, of grounding that in your life. Why is that so helpful for people with ADHD, no matter what it is? What does that do for them? Obviously, we've heard Jane's journey and description, but what is the science on that, or what does the research say?
Well, I believe, that, what you explained in terms of sports and then ceramics, you might think those two are very different. But in some ways, they're both very creative, right? You have structure, which is huge, right? So you have steps, but within those steps, there's the ability to be creative, right? Express yourself. Yeah. There's nobody that's going to move on the rugby field just like you. You're going to bring that individuality and that beauty to your movements within a structure. You're going to create a piece of pottery with certain steps. You have to do certain things, but nobody's going to create that same piece at the end. That's going to be your individuality, right? So I just think that speaks to many of the things that are so important for those who have, diagnosis of ADHD, because you're going through steps, but so there is structure, but within that structure I can play, right? And play is so important, because in play we discover our true, sense of who we are and joy, right? That's joy in life. I talk to my clients a lot about dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter that's directly linked to learning and motivation. And exactly, you said it so brilliantly, but exactly that place where you're stuck sometimes, nothing worse than when you're stuck to keep pushing. Take a breath, and I always say, take a dopamine hit. Go walk around the house, play with a dog, do 20 jumping jacks. Of course, exercise is always great, but laughter gives dopamine, right? So if you can find something funny and laugh, within that there's play, there's movement, and that creates an energy that contributes to learning and motivation through dopamine. So, building in these pause points, I talk a lot about pause points, but building in these pause points for dopamine hits during the day. So say you're at work and
you
you're
even talked about that even in your day, right? Taking a break, taking a walk.
That's going to give you a hit. And you don't have to be Buddhist sitting on a mountain and meditating for hours on end. You can take these short little snippets of time that are going to fuel you and help your brain so that you can go on to the next thing. And so I think it's really important to understand that you can, do so many things to help yourself. I wish I'd known that stuff when I was younger.
Yeah.
Right? We know so much now that it's empowering.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
Yeah.
And it speaks to joy, I think.
I love the way you pointed that out, right? That it's like rugby and ceramics. It really is the process and the structure, but with creativity about that. I love that. And really 100%. That could be applied to everything, right? And those are the elements in it. And I also want to point out and highlight what you talked about is also just getting out in any kind of activity that has the elements where you thrive. Community, right? Interacting with other people. All of those things that help confidence, help build your resilience, help build your skill and make you feel like, okay, like this was a great day because I got to meet XYZ person or talk to this person, or I did my piece in ceramics, or I, worked out and, did my personal best in weightlifting or whatever. Like, it's all the elements of creating that container where then it can support you and work and support your strengths. So I think that's great.
And you always have something to fall back on as well. So, who knows, like if next week I get fired from my job, God forbid, it's not going to happen, but I'll have rugby and I'll have the other things that I enjoy in my life to be there and support me.
But I also loved what you said about, when you have a rough day.
Yeah, I love that.
Maybe you didn't do what you wanted to do at work, but I've got this other thing that can fuel me.
Yeah.
And that's so important. Right?
Yeah.
Because that can pick you up and like
it's that comparison, right? Joy. And that's that like yin and yang almost, you know?
Especially coming out of college when, like we talked about, you're probably not going to have your dream job. There's always going to be elements of your job that you don't like or that feel like a job because it's a job. So I think that's why it's even more important to have something else in your life that you can really love and be passionate about.
I agree. Yeah, it's great advice. Well, I want to thank both of you for joining us. Jane, you've been tremendously brave, courageous, vulnerable, and I think that's a great service, and we love hearing your journey. I think I'm going to take you up on the next episode talking about sports and ADHD. But thank you for joining me tonight. Annika, thank you again.
Of course. It was
for
great
all
to be
of your
here.
all of your feedback. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. We are going to put some resources in the show notes to connections to Annika or other resources for some of the things we talked about today, like assessments and so on. Again, I want to thank both of my guests. Thank you, Jane. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time on the next episode of Finding the Upside. Bye for now.